Welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to business continuity, resilience, cyber, emergency management, anything that helps you, your organization, or your community prepare for, respond to, and overcome adverse situations. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, please feel free. You can find me on LinkedIn. I am the only Alex Fullick there. I'm really easy to find, and I do respond to everything I get. Today, we are going to be talking about something that we hear a lot about in the news. We hear it on radio stations. We see it in articles, online postings. We're going to be talking about ransomware. And I'd like to welcome back to the show is it officially your second?
This is my second, Alex. Absolutely. My
Second.
second opportunity to speak with you. Absolutely. Yeah. So
I guess I get confused because I know we've done conferences and other things together. So
we have, and let's do 1,000 of those things. let's keep doing it, right, for both of us,
No,
right? So
I'm fine
absolutely.
with that.
No,
Well, welcome
my
back,
pleasure.
John Luizzi.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Appreciate the invitation to speak with you again today. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I'm
Sure.
glad you could come back and have a chat. I know the last time we talked, you said you'd be happy to come back and you gave a whole list of topics. So, and I said, be careful what you wish for. Well, here you are. Just in case anyone didn't listen to the previous episode we did, could you just take a minute or so and tell us about yourself, what you do?
Sure. I am the National Director of Business Continuity for Southern Glazers Wine and Spirits. Southern Glazers Wine and Spirits is the largest distributor in the world, essentially, of wine and spirits throughout North America, Canada, the Caribbean. Just an amazing organization to work for. Specifically, we have a very robust business continuity program. Actually, we built the program over the last 10 years here, and it's a world-class program, to be frank with you. And the big reason for that is we have an outstanding executive support for our program and initiatives that we have, and continually investing in our program, making sure we have the right resources, the right people. It's just really a great story associated with business continuity and what we've been able to accomplish. I have a team of incredible experts that have over 160 years of experience in just the six of us, and it's just been, like I say, a great story associated with business continuity, and we continue to enhance and work for our organization really hard every day. But it's just a pleasure to be part of this organization. I will tell you that it really is. So
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad to have you back, John. And just for our listeners, how John mentioned having a really good executive and their buy-in and the support, that was actually our topic the first time we talked about. So I recommend everyone go back and have a listen to John's session there. There's some great information in there. But we're going to talk about ransomware today. So let's start with the most obvious question, just in case, because we do have listeners around the globe, and maybe
sure.
not everybody understands what ransomware is. Could you explain what a ransomware and a ransomware event is?
Yeah, typically, Alex, it's essentially a cyber event where data within an organization, systems within an organization, in some way, shape, or form, are compromised or locked down as a third party intruder, essentially bad actor, enters into your systems, enters into your network, and essentially, in some way, shape, or form, captures a certain amount of data, can encrypt that particular data, and then put different types of software and techniques in place that essentially could make those systems inaccessible, or the data contained within those systems, inaccessible or unreadable in certain types of format, right? So once that occurs, what happens next is that an organization will essentially, the bad actors will essentially approach the organization in some way, shape, or form that would say, hey, we have your data, we have your systems, and if you don't pay us an X number of dollars of ransom, we're going to either expose it on the web for all to see, and that could lead to all kinds of exposures of personal data, employee data, customer data, employee data. So that's kind of some of the bad things that can happen for an organization as far as exposure of data, or just essentially lock their systems down so the systems are unusable, and as a result, like production, think about an organization that's a manufacturing or some type of thing like that, or a bank and things like that. Any of their transactional systems are just no longer operational, and as a result, it's a complete business shutdown. So it can take various different forms associated with how it's executed. and they continue to get more and more sophisticated techniques
Mm.
that are utilized to either encrypt the data or to, essentially steal the data, and then essentially, sell it back to you specifically, or have you, our organization, pay for not exposing it, for them not to expose it and things like that. So the attacks vary by the different groups that are essentially, perform these type of criminal activities. But it is a reality. It's probably the number one, what I would call, threat amongst organizations today. So
Is the difference with a ransomware event from other cyber events is that you are contacted by the hackers, the bad players, rather than us, the internal folks, identifying it?
well, typically somebody from a ransomware perspective, you are contacted because somebody's looking to get paid for some
Mhm.
value, or some value associated with that, right? You know, cyber attacks, other type of cyber attacks could be just like a denial of service or some other type of thing
Right.
where the systems are dysfunctional and they're not. So nobody's kind of really sort of asking for anything. It's just kind of done for the purpose of of uh, of interruption of business. But in a ransomware attack, it's pretty clear that there's an objective here to be paid for a certain amount of dollars associated with being able to either release your data or allow access back into your systems. And organizations have to make a big decision about when they are ransom specifically, what is the value of the data that they've lost, what's the impact of the data, of the loss of that data, or even just the exposure of that data, in a public manner, right? And then, from there, it's like, okay, well, how good do we feel about, when you start evaluating whether or not, hey, we're going to pay the ransom or not pay the ransom, it's like, how confident are we in the quality of our data and our backups associated with that? How quickly do we think that we can restore? And what's the maturity of our business continuity plans? I mean, that's obviously going to be tested during this particular time, right?
Mhm.
And for how long or what a duration, can we operate in a certain manner? Like, organizations, potentially, there's so much automation now. You're talking about going back to the 1980s and 1970s associated with how you'd operate your business. So there's manual modes associated with that, things that we take for granted for now for automation are no longer there. So could you operate in a 2024 year, but yet you're leveraging, using processes that you used back in the 1980s, and how long could you do that for, and what's the tolerance for that, right, for your customer base? And then once the impact on your company's reputation, when
Mhm.
that occurs, with all of your stakeholders, all of your suppliers, all of your customers, and then obviously when it hits the public awareness, the social media, where does that go associated with your reputational, within the public perception of your company? So
But a couple of things. One, I just want to say, manual processes, I don't think a lot of companies would be able to do it
correct,
anymore.
right,
If you've got a 40, 50-year-old veteran in the company and she might be able to show everyone how to do things, that might be okay. But most would have no clue about manual processes. And my
right,
example is I was in a restaurant once where the systems went down and they couldn't process any debit cards or Visa or MasterCard, Amex, anything like that. So I asked the manager, because I happened to be a customer there, I said, do you have one of the old uh, machines that you ran across a credit card like
yep,
this?
yep, yep,
And he goes, well, yeah, there is something like that in the office. And I said, go get it. And I said, and it should be a bunch of forms beside it. And he brought out all these forms, the little
yep,
uh,
yep,
transactions. And I had to show his staff and him how to use that machine
yep,
so
how to
that they
run the
could bill
cards,
the
yep,
customers. And and they were looking at me going, this is how they used to do it? And I
yeah,
went, yeah. I said, this is the manual process. I said, so and I had to tell them how to uh, work things after their shift, how to add everything together and what they do, because they had no idea how to do it.
but essentially you're just, you're going back into the Stone Age potentially, because we rely heavily so much on automation and robotics now in all of our different
Yeah,
processes and things like that. And now if that's no longer available for a certain amount of time, can you survive in a manual paper mode? Like the
yeah,
concept of carbon papers, it comes to mind immediately, right? As far as
yeah, yeah.
copying thing and stuff like that, right? So, but anyway, but that's the reality. That's what organizations are dealing with when they go through one of these type of situations. So.
Well, and the other question I had for you is, how do we detect that we have an issue, or do we have to wait for someone to contact us and say that, by the way, you have an issue? How do we detect it?
Well, typically it's, the organization finds out pretty firsthand because, if they've infiltrated a network, then there's a potentially you've seen the graphics or a screen comes up and says, "Hey, you are being ransom and you have 24 hours to respond or we will delete your data." I mean, it's you've seen all types of screenshots on the internet of different companies that have gone through that, and actually what
Mhm.
appears within it. Other times it could be, just an exposure on the web, on the dark web, or just even a public web. It's like, from a particular, group that says, "Hey, we have your data. We have the data for this particular company, and we're going to expose it," or calls them out in some way, shape, or form. But in that case, it's a very public exposure that you have been ransomed or you have been attacked in some way, shape, or form. You've been compromised, and as a result, now it becomes very much of a public reputation management, crisis management situation you have to deal because it has been released to the public. So I mean, it happens in either way, where essentially it's an
Mhm.
internal thing where you can deal with it, and but then it could be also happen in a very, very public manner as well.
Is there anything internal that allows us to detect it before that happens?
It depends upon, the sophistication you have as far as your cyber infrastructure and the different controls that you have. I mean, we often hear about the fact that, hackers that are very sophisticated, they utilize, ransomware attacks. They're in the network for days, weeks, and months
Yeah,
prior
yeah.
to the execution of an actual attack, right? I mean, I think I heard a while ago, it was from one of the cyber groups. I don't know if it was InfoSec or what that talked about over 200 days. Is the average time where a bad actor will be in your network. Understanding where to exploit within your network and the relationships, that type of thing. Because the important thing about a ransomware attack is also understanding what is the valuable data. What will get the attention, right? And the other thing about it is that, for companies that deal with other companies that have all different relationships, part of it could also be where it's like, hey, we don't want your data, but we have one of your suppliers' data. And so they call up the supplier and say, "Hey, guess what? We got your data from this other company here. So if you don't tell them to pay us, we're going to expose your data, even though we
Mm.
were using it as we were just a customer of theirs, stuff like that." So it's got so many different aspects of how it could be executed, and that's what makes it such a challenging problem. So
Well, that's why I thought I'd ask, because I'm sure where you work, and I know I've worked with different clients, there's so much focus on having a strong cyber environment
right,
and response and preparedness, et cetera, et cetera. But then ransomware comes along, and you find out they've been there for a
right,
long time. Like you said, possibly 200 days. So
yeah,
it's like, okay, so what can we do to detect it? Is there something that we
yeah.
have that allows us to do that, so that we could point out, or an analyst could say, hey, something looks wrong here, and identify that, hey, we are actually under attack. It just hasn't been announced yet.
Yeah, but and one of the big things, the important thing is obviously making sure you keep all of your software up to date, all of your upgrades, that type of thing,
Mhm.
all your patch management associated with that. So maintaining the currency of your infrastructure with all the latest fixes and patches and things like that is really, really important. But also, if you see different anomalies that are occurring within your systems and your networks and things like that, or data in some way, shape, or form is being is not correct or anything else like that or dated, those are also signs that, hey, something else potentially is going wrong and within your network. So you want to pay attention to that and do some more in-depth forensics before it turns into something larger. So
Yeah, I know, a lot of people in IT and security, and they're looking at denial of service, and they're looking at other things, but I don't know if people really know what to look for when it comes to
Mm.
ransomware until they're actually told.
Right. Well, I mean, like I say, it's just another aspect of cyber, cyber, whether it's performance of a network or data, data availability, data encryption, data, that type of thing. So, I mean, there's so many different ways that from an IT perspective, that a ransomware attack could be executed. It's just kind of keeping your alarms up at all times, because you're trying to identify potentially where potentially another attack would come. And then a big part of it also is to make sure you educate your employees around, about what should they see any anomalies, because they're your best source of information, right? Because typically your employees will tell you if there's an issue with a particular system or application, or if there's there's some data issues associated with that. So you want to make sure you educate them on some of the warning signs, potential signs associated with potentially either some type of cyber attack or ransomware attack. Because and then also educating them on not phishing on phishing links and things like that, educating when you click on certain things, reporting, watching spam, reporting spam, having the appropriate spam filters in place. So in addition to all the technical architecture that you can build, the best line of defense in a lot of ways is your employees.
Yeah. And on that note, we've come to the end of our first segment. Today, we are talking with John Luizzi, and we are talking about ransomware events and crisis management and leadership for those events. We will be right back. If you like that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.